Silence swallowed the velvet-walled room like a coffin lid closing. Matteo Castelliano knelt beside the poker table. His 7-year-old son Marco collapsed onto the green felt, lips turning blue, his small body convulsing. Cards scattered everywhere. Stacks of cash tumbled across the table. The boy's breathing came in shallow gasps, then stopped entirely. For 17 years, Matteo had built an empire on fear and precision. Death warrant signed at dawn. Enemies disappeared by nightfall. He had survived his own father's murder when he was barely older than this child. He had clawed his way up from nothing through blood and bone and merciless calculation. But none of that mattered now. His hands trembled as he reached for his son. Hands that had never trembled. Hands that men feared. Completely useless. Carlo and Pietro stood frozen by the mahogany doors, their weapons hanging heavy at their sides. Armed guards positioned at every corner suddenly looked like statues. The private doctor stammered about anaphylaxis, about an EpiPen that failed, about a hospital 20 minutes away through November rain that had turned the Boston streets into rivers of darkness. 20 minutes. The boy would not last 20 minutes. Cigar smoke hung motionless in the air, suspended between the crystal chandeliers and the blood-red walls. The silence was absolute. Even the rain seemed to pause outside the blackened windows, as if the sky itself held its breath. Then the service entrance door opened. A woman in a hotel-made uniform pushed through the guards, rain dripping from her thin coat onto the Italian marble floor. She was slight, probably in her late 20s, but something in her eyes cut through the panic like a blade through butter. Her name was Vivien Morgan, though Matteo did not know it yet. She had come to clean the poker room after the shift ended, to collect the spent glasses and wipe down the felt tables where men wagered fortunes on single cards. She did not ask permission. She did not hesitate. She moved to the boy with the calm certainty of someone who had already lived through the worst night of her life. Her fingers found his jaw, tilted his head back with deliberate precision. She checked his airway. She placed her hands against his thin ribs and performed the Heimlich maneuver with desperate, perfect pressure. Once. Twice. The piece of cashew dislodged from his throat. It flew across the table and landed among the scattered cash. The boy gasped. Coughed. His small body shuddered as air flooded back into his lungs. His lips shifted from blue to purple to the pale color of a child who had just lived when he should have died. Matteo looked up at this woman, this nobody in a maid's uniform, her hand still on his son's back, rain from her coat dripping onto stacks of $100 bills. Water pooled on the green felt. Her eyes met his for exactly 2 seconds, and in that moment, something shifted in the most dangerous man in Boston. His son began to cry. Real, living, terrified sobs. Matteo pulled him close, breathing in the smell of his shampoo, the warmth of his small body, the fact of his existence. But what he did not know, what none of them knew in that suspended moment, was that the woman who just saved his son's life had less than $2 in her pocket. That she had a 7-year-old of her own waiting in a cold apartment, a child whose heart was failing, a child who needed $200,000 for surgery in 10 days or he would not survive Christmas. And that the principle upon which Matteo Castelliano had built his entire empire was this: debts must always be repaid. He did not know any of this yet. He only knew that she had saved what mattered most. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to 48 hours earlier, when Vivien Morgan's world was already collapsing. 48 hours earlier, the November rain fell in sheets against the windshield of an ancient sedan with a check engine light that had been burning orange for 3 years. Vivien sat in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel at the 10-2 position, her knuckles white. The car was dying. She could feel it the way you feel a person slipping away. The engine was skipping, coughing, asking for things she could not give it. 2 blocks ahead, the interstate split like a mouth opening. Her son Micah sat in the back seat, 7 years old, his small face turned toward the window. His sister Emma, 5, was curled against him with her stuffed rabbit. Both children were shivering. The heat had stopped working 2 months ago. She had wrapped them in every blanket they owned, but the cold still found its way in, creeping through the gaps around the doors, settling into the spaces between ribs. The car lurched. The engine made a sound like a creature dying. Vivien's foot came off the accelerator. She guided it toward the shoulder as gently as she could manage. The sedan rolled to a stop on the wet asphalt, wheels still slightly on the painted line. Rain hammered the roof. The windshield wipers beat back and forth, but they could not keep up with the deluge. She turned the key. The engine groaned. It did not turn over. She tried again. Nothing. Just the grinding sound of a motor that had given everything it had and had nothing left. "Mommy." Emma's voice was small and uncertain. "Is the car broken?" Vivien did not turn around. She sat very still with her hands on the wheel. "The car needs a rest, baby," she said quietly. "We're going to rest here for a moment." In her pocket, she had $2.17. In her bank account, which she had checked at the ATM 6 hours ago, she had minus $43. Negative. The bank was charging her $9 a month just to keep the account open. Every month, the number went lower. She reached into the back seat and pulled her son Micah toward her, feeling his small body settle against her chest. His breathing came easy, but she could feel his heart, the sick, struggling heart that the hospital had said needed a new valve, a new piece of it, something they called a bovine transplant, $197,000 to save his life. 10 days. That was what the cardiologist had said. In 10 days, they needed the surgery or complications would begin. By Christmas, the window would close. Vivien had $13 in savings. $13 after 8 years of scrubbing other people's bathrooms, after 16-hour shifts at the downtown hotel where Douglas Hale pocketed her tips and threatened her with termination if she said a word to anyone. The rain kept falling. She heard the sound before she saw anything, a low engine rumble, distinct and foreign against the rhythm of the downpour. Not a regular car. Something larger. Something expensive. Headlights appeared through the wall of rain. A black SUV materialized out of the darkness like something emerging from deep water. Then another. Then 3 more, lined up in perfect formation, moving slowly along the interstate. The lead vehicle began to slow as it approached her broken sedan on the shoulder. The window of the lead SUV rolled down. A man's face appeared, half hidden in shadow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvered at the temples. His eyes held something ancient, something that had seen things most people could not imagine. He was wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than everything Vivien owned. A small gold watch caught the rain on his wrist. "You need help." His voice was deep and solid like an oath. Vivien felt her throat constrict. She had learned not to trust men with that kind of voice, men with that kind of money, men in vehicles like these. "We are fine," she said. "The car just needs." "The car is dead," he said. It was not cruel, just factual. "You have children." She did not answer, but Micah shifted against her, and that was answer enough. The man opened his door. He was tall, 6'2" or 3, and when he stood, he seemed to block out the sky. He wore a white shirt beneath the cashmere, open at the collar. A scar ran from his left eye down to his jawline, silver in the rain. His name was Matteo Castellano, though Vivien did not know it yet. He had already decided to change her life. He did not know it either. 2 days before the rain on the interstate, Vivien Morgan stood in her kitchen holding a piece of paper that felt like a death sentence. The medical bill trembled in her hands. $200,000. That was the number. That was what her youngest son needed to survive past Christmas. That was what she did not have. The kitchen was small, the walls painted a color that had probably been white 10 years ago but had settled into something closer to ash. 3 cabinet doors hung open because the hinges were broken and she could not afford to fix them. On the counter sat a single box of generic cereal, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, and a bottle of water she had refilled from the tap so many times the plastic had turned cloudy. Vivien opened her wallet. 2 single-dollar bills stared back at her. $2. This was all that stood between her and absolute nothing. She folded the medical bill and placed it on the counter next to the cereal box. Then she pulled something else from her pocket, something she touched at least a dozen times each day. A photograph. The edges were soft from handling, the corners bent. In the photograph, a man with warm brown eyes and a construction worker's tan looked directly at the camera. Marcus Morgan. Her husband. Dead 8 months now. Dead in a moment that lasted less than a second when a steel beam shifted and the world changed forever. The creditors called 3 times a day. Their voices were all the same, professional, patient, relentless. She owed $60,000 in his debts. $60,000 for a man who no longer existed. The hospital had sent 7 letters about the foreclosure. 7 letters that she kept in a showbox under her bed because she could not bring herself to open them all at once. In the living room, Micah lay on the couch. He was 6 years old but looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of his own heart was pressing him down into the cushions. His skin had taken on a grayish tone that made Vivien's chest tighten every time she looked at him. He was not playing. He was not drawing. He was simply lying there, breathing in the shallow way he breathed now, the way that made his small ribs visible through his shirt. His lips held a faint blue tint, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. Emma, his older sister, sat at the edge of the couch near his feet. She was 9 years old and already knew how to perform the role of a child who was not worried, even though worry had carved itself into the space between her eyebrows. She held a library book open but was not reading it. She was watching Micah the way a person watches a flickering candle, wondering when the light might go out. "Mama." Micah's voice was thin. "When will my heart be better?" Vivien knelt beside the couch. She took his small hand in hers. His fingers were cold. They were always cold now. "Very soon," she said. "The doctors are going to fix it. You are going to be strong again." "Will it hurt?" "The doctors will make sure you do not feel pain." What she did not say was that the surgery was 10 days away and she had $2. What she did not say was that the hospital had been very clear, without the deposit, there would be no surgery. What she did not say was that she was running out of time in a way that felt like drowning in slow motion. She stood up. She had to work. She was always working. There was the morning shift at the Grand Atlantic Hotel, 6 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, cleaning the rooms that wealthy people had destroyed in the space of a single night. Then there was the evening shift at the hotel restaurant, 5 o'clock until midnight or later if Douglas Hale decided that more tables needed serving. 16 hours if she was lucky. 18 if she was not. The Grand Atlantic Hotel occupied the corner of Boylston and Arlington in downtown Boston. It was the kind of place where people wore watches that cost more than Vivien's monthly rent. The kind of place where the lobby gleamed with marble and the restaurant served food that most people ate only on the most important days of their lives. Vivien had learned to move through its halls like a ghost, present but unseen. She dressed in her maid uniform at 5:30 in the morning, before the sun rose, before her children woke. The uniform was white and shapeless. It made her invisible, which was what she wanted. Invisibility was safer. Invisibility meant you were not noticed and therefore not blamed when things went wrong. The morning shift passed in a blur of bleach and hot water and the particular exhaustion that came from standing for 7 hours while other people's filth washed away under your hands. By 1 o'clock, her shoulders ached and her feet had begun to send small signals of pain with each step. She changed into her server uniform, black slacks, white blouse, a name tag that said Vivien, and was back in the hotel restaurant by 4:45. Douglas Hale was standing near the host stand when she arrived. He was a man in his 60s, the restaurant manager, thin in a way that suggested he did not eat but instead drank. His grey hair was combed back from his forehead with what might have been deliberate precision or might have simply been the result of not moving his head for several hours. He wore an expensive watch. Vivien had learned to notice expensive watches. His eyes were the color of wet pavement. He watched her clock in. "Morgan," he said. His voice was quiet. "I need you in storage for a moment." The storage closet was in the back of the kitchen, behind the line, past the walk-in freezer. It smelled like industrial cleaning supplies and something older, something that no amount of bleach could quite erase. Vivien followed him into it. He closed the door behind her. The fluorescent light hummed. A single bulb threw sharp shadows across the shelves of napkins and tablecloths and bottles of expensive wine that guests ordered and people like Vivien served. "Table 12 tonight," Douglas said. The couple that came in at 6:15. They left a $60 tip on a $100 bill. Vivien said nothing. She knew where this was going. "Hotel policy," he continued, "states that management must hold all gratuities for tax purposes. You understand that, correct? Mr. Hale. Do you understand?" His hand came up and closed around her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise immediately, but hard enough that she understood the pressure behind it. Hard enough that she understood this was not a discussion. This was an announcement of how things would be. "Yes," she said. "Good." He released her. "You are scheduled until 2 in the morning tonight. Table rotation is heavy. I need you here for all of it." She did not say that she had been awake since 4 in the morning. She did not say that Micah had coughed through most of the night and she had sat beside him in the darkness counting his breaths. She did not say anything. She nodded and left the storage closet. The dinner service was relentless. 30 covers became 50 became 70. Her feet moved across the carpet and tile, her hands balanced plates that grew heavier with each hour. She smiled at guests who did not look at her and apologized to guests who complained that their steaks were too rare or their soup too cold. By 11 o'clock, her vision had begun to blur at the edges. It was during the last seating, near midnight, that Sophie Langford appeared in the dining room. Sophie Langford was the hotel's executive director, a woman in her 50s with blonde hair that had been carefully arranged to look effortless and a suit that had probably cost more than 3 months of Vivien's rent. She moved through the restaurant like she owned it, which, in a sense, she did. Behind her walked 2 other women, both equally expensive, both carrying the kind of polish that came from a lifetime of not having to worry about money. They were being seated at a table near the bar, in the section that Vivien was serving. Sophie saw Vivien approaching with water glasses and a smile that was professional, that was practiced, that was empty of any actual warmth. "Vivien," Sophie said, loud enough for her companions to hear. "I was just telling my friends about you." Vivien felt something cold move down her spine. "How is your situation?" Sophie continued. "Your husband, wasn't it? Terrible accident. I offered you a position in our charitable foundation, remember? Extra hours, very meaningful work. But you turned it down. Such pride sometimes gets in the way of good sense, does it not?" The other women smiled. They looked at Vivien the way one looks at a painting in a museum, with detached interest and no real connection. "I appreciate the offer," Vivien said quietly. "I am grateful for the work I have." "Of course you are," Sophie said. She turned back to her friends and began to speak as if Vivien had already left. The thing about people in these situations is that they simply cannot accept help. It is a kind of stubborn poverty, I think. They would rather suffer than admit they need assistance. Vivien filled their water glasses and left. By 2 in the morning, when she finally clocked out, she had served 143 people. She had run 3 miles back and forth across the restaurant. She had smiled until her face ached. She had made $72 in tips, of which Douglas Hale would let her keep perhaps half. Perhaps. She drove home in her ancient sedan, a 2003 Honda that she had bought for $1,200 3 years ago and which was now held together primarily by rust and stubbornness. The radio did not work. The windshield had a crack that spiderwebbed from the upper left corner. The driver's side window would not roll down. The rain started as she merged onto the interstate heading north. Light rain at first, then harder, then the kind of rain that made visibility almost impossible. The wipers on the sedan were old and left streaks across the windshield that made the oncoming headlights blur and swim. She was thinking about Micah. She was thinking about that surgery date, November 25th, only 8 days away now, and the $2 in her pocket. She was thinking about what the cardiologist had said: without intervention, the defect in his heart would continue to deteriorate. Without intervention, he would not survive the winter. The car made a sound. Not a dramatic sound. Not a grinding or a bang or anything sudden. Just a small sound, a subtle change in the engine's pitch, the kind of sound that a person would notice if they were paying attention but which could easily be missed if you were exhausted enough, if you were worried enough, if you were already drowning. Then the power steering went. The wheel became heavy, suddenly difficult to turn. Vivien gripped it with both hands and managed to steer the sedan toward the shoulder. The rain continued to hammer down. The car rolled to a stop just past the guardrail, half on the shoulder, half still in the danger zone of the passing lane. She sat there in the darkness, hands shaking. Emma and Micah were asleep in the backseat. Micah was pressed against the window, his forehead leaving a small circle of condensation on the glass. Emma was curled against him, her head on his shoulder, protecting him even in sleep. Vivien opened the door and stepped out into the November rain. The rain hammered against the windshield like fists demanding entry. Vivien Morgan stood in the November downpour, a useless umbrella inverted in her grip, the fabric torn and flapping uselessly while headlights from distant cars blurred into watercolor streaks across the wet pavement. Behind her, through the sedan's rear window, she could see Micah pressing his small face against the glass, his breath fogging the cold window. His lips held a pale bluish tint. Emma sat beside him, her 7-year-old arm wrapped protectively around her brother's shoulders, trying to share what little warmth the child could offer. The engine had died 3 minutes ago. Not with drama or warning, but with a small, subtle shift in the engine's pitch that Vivien had noticed only because she was already drowning in worry. The power steering had gone first. Then everything else simply stopped. Now the ancient sedan sat half on the shoulder, half in the danger zone where trucks and late-night drivers could clip them without seeing. Vivien's phone was dead. Her wallet held $2.43. A tow truck would cost $80 to $120, which meant she did not have a tow truck. She had nothing except a sick child and 8 days remaining before a surgery that cost $200,000 that she did not possess. She stepped into the rain anyway, trying to wave down the sparse traffic on Interstate 93 at nearly midnight. A few cars passed without slowing. One truck driver honked but did not stop. The rain intensified, cold enough to make her shiver, and she thought about Micah inside the vehicle, his small body struggling just to breathe the same air that came so easily to everyone else in the world. Then the headlights appeared. 3 black SUVs emerged from the rain like a dream someone was having about power and money. They moved as a unit, perfectly spaced, tinted windows reflecting nothing. The convoy slowed as it approached her. The middle SUV came to a complete stop. The sound of the engine idling was deep and controlled, the sound of something expensive and dangerous at rest. The rear door opened. Matteo Castelliano stepped out into the November rain, and the rain seemed to part for him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark suit soaked immediately but somehow still maintaining its shape like water could not dare to wrinkle something so expensive. His dark hair was wet, plastered to his forehead. But it was his face that stopped Vivien's breath. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to his jawline, a thin silver line that spoke of violence survived. His eyes were the color of a storm at sea, gray and impenetrable, the eyes of a man who had seen things that gentler people were never meant to witness. He was 37 years old but looked older in the way that power ages you, wearing down the soft parts of your face until only the angles remain. Your car. His voice was rough, shaped like gravel being poured into a metal drum. Vivien nodded, rain plastering her dark hair to her skull. My son is sick. I just need to get home. It is 8 days to his surgery and I cannot afford. She stopped. There was no point explaining her desperation to a stranger. Matteo looked past her, through the sedan's rear window, at the pale-lipped boy pressed against the glass. Something shifted in his expression like a door opening in a dark room. He turned back to Vivien, and she saw it now, recognition, or something close to it, the face of a man who understood what it meant to watch a child struggle to survive. "How old?" he asked. 8 years old. But his heart. I did not ask about his heart. How old? 8. Matteo's jaw tightened. He turned to the two men who had exited the front seats of the middle SUV. Both were dark-haired, both wore black coats over expensive suits, both had the careful posture of men trained to move through the world as weapons. "Carlo, get them in the vehicle. Pietro, call my doctor to the estate. Tell him I need a pediatric cardiac assessment in the next 30 minutes. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of someone accustomed to obedience. Carlo was already moving toward the sedan, opening the back door, his movements efficient and practiced. Pietro was on his phone, already speaking in rapid Italian to someone on the other end. Vivien stepped backward. "I do not know you. I cannot accept." Matteo cut her off. His eyes found hers, and she understood in that moment why men feared him. "Your son needs warmth and medicine in the next 20 minutes or you will lose him on this highway. Choose." She looked back at Micah. His small hand was pressed against the window. Emma was pulling him away from the cold glass, whispering something meant to comfort. Vivien chose. The interior of the SUV was warm, heated seats and leather upholstery that smelled of money and cigarettes and cologne that cost more than her monthly rent. Matteo sat across from her while Carlo drove. Pietro occupied the front passenger seat, still on the phone in that rapid, musical Italian that Vivien could not follow. Matteo had a blanket brought from somewhere, placing it over Micah with movements that were surprisingly gentle for hands that surely had done terrible things. Micah did not pull away. Children, Vivien had learned, could sense when someone meant them no harm, even if that someone was dangerous in every other regard. The rain continued as they drove through Boston, neon from distant billboards reflecting on the wet pavement in distorted patterns. Vivien held the photo of Marcus, her late husband, taken 3 years before the construction accident that had crushed him in more ways than the physical. The photo was worn soft at the edges from constant handling, from nights when she pulled it out to remind herself that he had existed, that their years together had been real. What she did not know was that this moment, this ride through the rain to a destination she could not have imagined, was the beginning of everything changing. The estate emerged from the darkness like something from a fever dream. It was not a house. It was a statement made in stone and glass and manicured grounds that stretched into shadows. Security lights illuminated the perimeter. A gate, wrought iron and deliberately imposing, swung open as the SUV approached. The driveway curved through gardens that even in November maintained their dignity. Matteo's doctor was waiting at the main entrance. An older man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to attending to important people. He led them inside without questions, his eyes taking in Micah's pale coloring with professional assessment. A guest room on the second floor. Marble floors. Silk curtains drawn against the rain. A bed that swallowed Micah in its expanse. The doctor examined the boy with instruments that beeped softly, asking quiet questions while Emma clutched Vivien's hand and Vivien tried not to cry from the sheer relief of warmth and shelter and the possibility that her son might actually survive the week. The doctor spoke to Matteo in the hallway. Vivien heard through the cracked door. Congenital heart condition. The valve replacement surgery he needs costs $200,000. Without it in the next 10 days, maybe 2 weeks maximum. The doctor did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Matteo stepped back into the room. He was a different man in this moment, something dangerous still, but danger tempered with purpose. He studied Vivien, then Micah, then returned his gaze to her face. "Thank you for helping us," Vivien whispered. "The doctor visit, the warmth, I will find a way to repay you. How much do you need for the surgery?" Her eyes widened. "I cannot accept. I did not offer. I asked how much." His voice was flat, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Vivien's throat closed. She pulled the $2 from her pocket, the last money between her family and absolute destitution. $200,000. The surgery is scheduled for November 25th, but I cannot pay the deposit, so they will cancel. I have been working 2 jobs, but after rent and Marcus's medical debts and food and Emma's school, this is all I have left. She held out the $2. Her face burned. I am nobody. You do not know me. Why would you help me? Matteo looked at the $2 in her trembling hand. He was quiet for so long that Vivien thought he might be reconsidering, might be deciding that her desperation was not his responsibility. You helped a stranger on the highway without knowing who I was, he said finally. You stepped into the rain for your son without hesitation. That means something. In the doorway, Carlo and Pietro exchanged a look neither had seen in the 15 years they had worked for Matteo Castelliano. They had never heard him speak like this. They had never seen him offer anything without expecting payment in return. Over the next hour, while Emma slept curled against Micah, Vivien told Matteo her story. She spoke about Marcus, about the construction accident, about the $60,000 in medical debts he had accumulated before he died. She described the creditors calling at midnight. The eviction notices. The night spent choosing between heating and food. She showed him the photo of Marcus, her voice breaking as she explained that he had been a good man, a careful man, a man who had never hurt anyone and had died in pain because the world did not care about careful men. Matteo listened without interrupting. His expression softened in ways his men had never witnessed. I have a son, he said quietly. The same age as Micah. His mother left when he was young. He has never had someone like you. Someone who acts instead of freezes. The rain continued outside, drumming against the windows, and in that sound Vivien heard something like mercy. By morning, Matteo had arranged for Vivien's car to be towed and repaired. By afternoon, he had given her his private number and assured her the surgery deposit would be handled. She returned home in a state of disbelief, wondering if the entire evening had been something she had imagined while running on empty. The next day, she returned to the Grand Atlantic Hotel for her shift. Douglas Hale was waiting in the restaurant supply room. He was a man in his 60s, expensive watch, expensive shoes, the kind of person for whom other people's suffering was a minor annoyance. He cornered her between boxes of napkins and bottles of cleaning solution. You were late this morning. That is a $200 fine from your paycheck. My car broke down, Vivien said carefully. My son was. I do not care about your excuses. Douglas stepped closer, his breath sour with coffee and old anger. You work when I tell you to work. And tonight you are covering the private event in the 3rd floor dining room until 3 in the morning. Refuse and you are fired. Try to report me and I will make sure no hotel in Boston ever hires you again. His hand grabbed her wrist. Hard enough to bruise. Hard enough that she felt the casual certainty of his power over her. She pulled away, saying nothing. Saying nothing was survival. That evening, Sophie Langford hosted a charity gala in the ballroom. Vivien was assigned to serve champagne. Sophie saw her and approached with a group of wealthy donors, her smile bright and poisonous. Everyone, this is Vivien, one of our hardship cases. She lost her husband and works as our maid. I have been trying to get her into our assistance program, but she insists on working instead of accepting help. Such pride. The donors murmured sympathy while examining Vivien like a museum piece. One woman touched her uniform sleeve. How tragic. Sophie, you are so generous. Vivien's hands shook with humiliation, but she said nothing, serving drinks with burning cheeks, and realized in that moment that being nobody meant that your pain was entertainment for the comfortable. 3 days later, Matteo brought his son to meet her at a park. The boy was 7, quiet, watchful, trained by his world to trust no one. His name was Leonardo. He held his father's hand as they approached the bench where Vivien sat with Micah and Emma. The children played on the swings. Leonardo climbed higher than seemed wise for a boy his age, testing limits, looking back to see if Matteo was watching. He climbed too high. He fell into the wood chips hard enough to scrape both knees and begin crying. Before Matteo could move, Vivien was there, kneeling in the bark, cleaning the scrapes with tissues from her pocket, speaking softly in a voice like a prayer. "You are so brave. My son Micah has a sick heart, but he never complains. You are brave like him." Leonardo stared at her through tears. Then he wrapped his arms around her neck and held on like he was drowning. "Will you be my mama?" he whispered. Vivien froze. Behind her, Matteo's expression cracked open, something vulnerable and raw, the face of a man watching his son ask for the one thing his power could never purchase. Over the next week, Leonardo asked to see Vivien every day. He called her Mama. He held her hand. Matteo watched his son laugh for the first time in months, watched him ask questions without fear, watched him transform into something whole that he had never been before, and understood that this woman had already become family in a way blood could never explain. The surgery date approached. On the evening before Micah's operation, Vivien arrived at the hotel for her shift and saw Douglas and Sophie in the manager's office, looking at her through the glass window while whispering. Douglas smiled, a smile that contained no warmth, only the satisfaction of a predator who had finally positioned itself correctly to strike. She knew something was coming. But what she did not know was that they had discovered her connection to Matteo Castellano, and they had decided that her vulnerability was an opportunity to exploit one final time before they believed she would be untouchable. They were about to make the worst mistake of their lives. The rain continued outside, drumming against the windows of the downtown hotel, and in that sound, justice was approaching like thunder, rolling closer with every passing minute. The rain hammered against the hotel windows like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Vivien Morgan stood frozen in the center of the dining room, her tray of plates scattered across the marble floor in a symphony of shattering ceramic and breaking glass. Around her, 100 eyes turned like predators sensing blood in the water. Douglas Hale stood with his arms crossed, his grey suit impeccable, his face arranged in the expression of a man who had finally positioned himself to deliver the killing blow he had been waiting 8 years to throw. "Vivien Morgan has been stealing from the restaurant register," he announced, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of dinner service like a blade through silk. $500 is missing, and she was the last person with access before the close. Vivien's mouth opened but no sound emerged. Her hand shook. Around her, the wealthy diners leaned forward in their chairs, hungry for the spectacle of someone else's destruction, the kind of cruelty that made them feel superior, cleaner, safer in their own insulated lives. "I have never taken anything," Vivien whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of clinking glasses and orchestral music floating through invisible speakers. "Please, you know this is not true." Sophie Langford emerged from the crowd of diners like a shark rising through murky water. She wore a navy dress that cost more than Vivien earned in a month, her blonde hair arranged in perfect waves that had taken 2 hours to create that morning. Her face arranged itself into an expression of performative concern, the mask of someone who had perfected the art of cruelty disguised as kindness. "Douglas, are you absolutely certain?" Sophie asked, her voice dripping with false sympathy, each word a calculated strike. "This is such a serious accusation. Perhaps there has been some kind of accounting error." "Check her pockets," Douglas said, snapping his fingers at the security guards positioned near the kitchen entrance. They moved toward Vivien like wolves closing in on wounded prey. She backed away, her wet uniform clinging to her skin, her breath coming in short, panic gasps. The November cold from outside seemed to follow her, settling into her bones, freezing her from the inside. "I did not take anything," she said, louder now, desperation replacing caution. "I need this job. My son needs surgery in 3 days. 3 days. Please, you must believe me." Douglas stepped closer, his face arranging itself into a sneer that revealed the true shape of the man he had always been beneath the manager's uniform. "A thief and a liar," he said, loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. "Everyone sees what you are now." Sophie turned to the assembled guests with the practiced grace of an actress accepting an award. "I apologize for this disruption," she said, a tone suggesting regret she did not feel. "We try to help these unfortunate people, we really do, but sometimes they take advantage of our generosity." It is a pattern we have seen before with workers in their situation. A guest in the third row raised a phone, the camera lens pointed directly at Vivien's face. She could see the red recording light blinking like the eye of something watching her humiliation spread across the internet, multiplying with each passing second. Douglas leaned in close enough that only Vivien could hear his words beneath the ambient noise of the dining room. His breath smelled of coffee and something sour, something rotting beneath the surface. "You should have been grateful for what I gave you," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You should have kept your mouth shut and accepted what was offered. Now you will leave this hotel with nothing. I will ensure the police know about this theft. When they arrest you, your children will go into the system. They will be taken from you." Vivien felt the blood drain from her face. The room seemed to tilt slightly, gravity pulling in the wrong direction. Sophie positioned herself behind Vivien like a vulture settling in for the feast. "And I will personally ensure every charity in Boston knows you are a thief," she said, her voice pitched low but with enough volume for Vivien to catch every word. "Every social service agency, every potential employer, every organization that might have helped you. Your children will suffer for your crimes. That is a promise I am making to you right now." The security guards took Vivien by the arms. They were not rough, not exactly, but they were firm, immovable, the physical manifestation of authority that could not be questioned or resisted. They guided her toward the exit, past tables of diners who watched with the mixture of fascination and disgust usually reserved for watching a traffic accident unfold in slow motion. The November rain met her like a slap across the face. Cold drops fell in sheets, soaking through her uniform, running down her neck in rivulets that felt like ice water. She stood on the wet pavement outside the hotel, her legs shaking, her entire body trembling as if she had suddenly been dropped into the middle of a frozen lake. Neon signs from nearby buildings reflected in puddles around her feet, red, blue, green, colors that seemed obscene in their brightness given the darkness that had just descended on her life. She pulled her phone from her pocket with hands that refused to obey her mind's commands. $2. That was all she had. $2.43 to be precise, which she had been carrying since the morning, saving it for an emergency that now seemed laughably small compared to the emergency currently unfolding. The surgery was scheduled for tomorrow morning at St. Mary's Hospital. Micah would be wheeled into operating room 3 at 7 in the morning. The anesthesiologist would place the mask over his small face. The cardiologist would open his chest and replace the faulty valve with one grown from donated tissue, hoping it would allow his small heart to pump with the efficiency of a healthy one. And Vivien was supposed to pay $20,000 out of a $300,000 bill that the hospital had been willing to finance over 10 years. Now she had nothing. No job. No income. No way forward. She thought of Micah's pale face, the way his lips sometimes turned slightly blue when he exerted himself, the way he tried to hide his exhaustion from her to avoid worrying her further. She thought of Emma, her daughter, who had stopped asking for new shoes because she understood that money did not exist for such things. She thought of the photograph in her pocket, the one of Marcus, taken on their wedding day 15 years ago before the car accident that had taken him from them, before the medical debt had consumed everything they had built together. Her finger hovered over Matteo Castelliano's contact in her phone. He had given her his number the night of the rain, the night his convoy had appeared like a miracle and pulled her off that highway. They had spoken several times since then. Leonardo had called her Mama. But shame wrapped itself around her like a shroud, suffocating her, convincing her that she had brought this on herself, that she had been foolish to think someone like Matteo would believe her over people like Douglas and Sophie, that she was nobody and nobody's children mattered in a world built on the principle that money equaled worth. She deleted his number. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Emma, sent from the school library where her daughter was waiting for the school bus to take her home to the apartment they rented for $1,500 a month. Micah is asking when you are coming home. He wants you to read to him before bedtime. That one sentence. Vivien read it 3 times, each word settling into her chest like a stone being dropped into still water. Her son was asking for her. Not asking her to fix everything, not asking her to perform miracles, just asking for her presence, for her voice reading him a story before sleep claimed him. She took a shaking breath. She put the phone away. And she started walking home through the November rain, her soaked uniform clinging to her skin, her $2.43 in her pocket, her resolve crystallizing into something harder and colder than the rain itself. She was not done fighting. She was not finished yet. What Vivien did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was that her small moment of connection with Leonardo had already set something enormous into motion, something that had been building momentum since the morning when her son had mentioned to Carlo that his mama Vivien worked at a hotel downtown, that she was kind, that she had told him about his own mother's sacrifice. Carlo had seen the video within an hour of it being posted. The hotel security footage, the accusation, the public humiliation, Vivien's face crumpling as her character was destroyed in front of 100 witnesses. He had watched it once, then twice, then forwarded it to Matteo with a single line of text, "Boss. Watch this." Matteo Castelliano was sitting in his office on the 40th floor of a downtown building, reviewing documents related to a legitimate business acquisition, when he opened the video on his phone. He watched Douglas Hale point at Vivien. He watched Sophie Langford position herself perfectly for maximum cruelty. He watched the way Vivien's hands shook, the way she tried to defend herself against accusations designed to be impossible to disprove, the way the crowd of diners watched her destruction with expressions of contempt. And something ancient and cold stirred inside him, the same thing that had awakened at 17 when his father's killers had walked free because they had money and connections and the law was a tool that could be purchased like anything else. He made 2 phone calls. The first to his attorney, a woman named Rebecca Chen who had defended him successfully against 4 separate federal investigations. The second to a federal prosecutor he had done a favor for 10 years ago, back when the prosecutor had been a defense attorney and Matteo's alibi had suddenly solidified in ways that were not entirely legal. "I need you to look at 2 people," Matteo said into the phone, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "Douglas Hale and Sophie Langford. They work at the Boston Harbor Hotel. I believe they have committed federal crimes. I believe you will find evidence if you look in the right places." The prosecutor listened. He did not ask why Matteo was interested. He did not ask why a man with his reputation would involve himself in what appeared to be a simple wage theft case. He simply said, "I will make some calls." Over the next 48 hours, Matteo's people dug into the lives of Douglas Hale and Sophie Langford with the precision of archaeologists excavating a tomb. They found everything. 8 years of register theft totaling $400,000. Falsified tax documents. Harassment complaints from 17 different employees, all of them buried, all of them silenced through the threat of job loss and blackmail. For Sophie, they found charity fraud involving $600,000 in donated funds, money meant for hardship cases that had instead been funneled into her personal accounts. Tax evasion. Conspiracy to commit extortion. Federal crimes. Both of them. Evidence compiled in folders 3 inches thick. A single phone call to the federal prosecutor was all it took to put the machinery of justice into motion. Dawn broke grey and cold on November 24th, the day before Micah's surgery, the morning that changed everything. An FBI tactical team arrived at Douglas Hale's suburban home at 6 o'clock in the morning. Agents in black gear with FBI emblazoned across their chests in yellow letters pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Douglas answered in his bathrobe, his face going white as chalk when he saw the badges, the weapons, the expressions of people who did not negotiate. "Douglas Hale, you are under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering," the lead agent said, already moving forward with handcuffs clicking open like the jaws of something hungry. "Please, I can explain," Douglas said, collapsing to his knees on his front lawn as the cuffs tightened around his wrists. "I can pay it back. I have money. I will cooperate completely." The news cameras were already there, embedded in the neighborhood like waiting parasites, their lights flashing in the early morning darkness. Douglas Hale's face was captured in perfect detail, the moment his empire crumbled, the instant he transformed from predator into prey. Simultaneously, 8 blocks away in a luxury penthouse overlooking the harbor, FBI agents arrived at Sophie Langford's address. She answered the door in silk pajamas, her hair still styled from yesterday, her Botoxed face still arranged in the expression of someone who believed herself untouchable. "Sophie Langford, you are under arrest for charity fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit extortion," the agent said. Sophie tried to argue. She tried to invoke her lawyers, her family connections, the names of powerful people who would support her. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded. "My attorneys will destroy you. This is a mistake. This is a mistake." The agent did not respond to her words. He simply said, "Your attorneys are welcome to visit you in federal prison," and guided her toward the waiting vehicle with the same professional indifference one might reserve for someone who did not matter at all, which was precisely the point. Federal courthouse, 1 week later. Both villains in orange jumpsuits, Sophie's blonde hair now limp and dull, Douglas's face aged a decade in 7 days. The judge sat elevated above the proceedings like a deity rendered in wood and authority. The charges were read. Wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, embezzlement, charity fraud. The judge's voice was steady, measured, the voice of someone who had delivered justice thousands of times and would deliver it thousands more. 40 years, she said to Douglas Hale. No parole eligibility for 20 years. 40 years, she said to Sophie Langford. No parole eligibility for 20 years. Both villains would spend decades in prison, their wealth liquidated to pay restitution, their names destroyed beyond repair, their legacies reduced to a single Google search that returned articles about their crimes and their fall. This was not death. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. This was systematic destruction, the slow erasure of everything they had built, the knowledge that they would spend the rest of their lives behind concrete and steel, forgotten by everyone, pitied by no one. The news channels ran the story for a week. Boston hotel executives arrested in massive fraud scheme. Vivien's false accusation was retracted. An apology was issued by the hotel. Her name was officially cleared. But what she did not yet know was that Matteo had ensured his legal team worked overnight so the case would close before her son's surgery, because he had made a promise to repay a debt, and men like Matteo Castellano always kept their promises. Boston Children's Hospital, Intensive Care Wing, November 25, for in the afternoon. The waiting room held that particular silence of places where hope and terror live in the same breath. Vivien Morgan sat rigid in a plastic chair that had worn smooth from 10,000 other desperate parents, her fingers twisted together so tightly her nails had left crescents in her palms. Beside her, Emma, 16 years old, no longer a child but not yet equipped to be the strong one, stared at a television mounted in the corner where nobody was watching. The screen flickered with news. Both of them ignored it. 6 hours. The surgeon had said 6 hours, possibly 7. That was 5 hours and 43 minutes ago. Vivien's dress was the same one she wore to the hotel, wrinkled now from sitting, the fabric soft as tissue from 1,000 washings. A nurse had given her a paper cup of coffee 2 hours ago. It sat untouched on the side table, a thin film of cold grease on its surface. The scent of it mixed with antiseptic, that hospitals smell like bleach fighting to win a war against human suffering. She pulled out her phone. No messages. She knew there would be no messages. Nobody called her. Nobody texted. There was only the bank balance notification from that morning, the deposit that had changed everything, $200,000. Exactly what Micah needed. No explanation. No sender identification. The account simply showed the transfer had cleared. She had known. The moment she saw the number, she had known who moved money through the world like a man rearranging furniture in his own house. The elevator doors opened with a soft mechanical wheeze. Footsteps approached, measured, unhurried. Vivien did not look up. Hospital corridors produced a constant stream of footsteps, and she had learned not to hope. But these footsteps stopped in front of her. Vivien. She knew his voice like she knew her own heartbeat. Deep and solid like an oath, like the kind of voice that did not raise itself because the world had learned to listen. She lifted her head. Matteo Castelliano stood in the doorway of the waiting room wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything she had owned in her entire life combined, his dark hair impeccable, that scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone like a line drawn by fate itself. He was not smiling. His expression was something else entirely, something that looked like care, and on a man like Matteo, care looked almost dangerous. Behind him stood his son, Marco. No, not Marco, that was the lieutenant. His son was Dante, small-boned and dark-eyed, 7 years old, wearing clothes that matched his father's in cut and quality. The boy held a stuffed animal, something soft and worn, like it had been loved by hands that did not know how to be gentle. "You came," Vivien whispered. "My father said Micah was in surgery," Dante said, moving toward her with the unself-conscious directness of children, as if she were family, as if her heart breaking in a waiting room was something that demanded his presence. "Is he brave?" Vivien could not speak. She gestured toward the door, and Dante climbed into her lap with absolute certainty, the way he might have climbed into the lap of someone he had known his entire life. "He is very brave," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bravest boy I know. Except you." "I am very brave too," Dante agreed, and held out his stuffed animal. "You can hold this. Papa says when you are scared, you hold something soft." Matteo watched his son place the animal in Vivien's hands, and something shifted in his eyes, something that looked like a man seeing his own capacity for tenderness reflected in his son's face. The doors opened again. A surgeon emerged, still in surgical scrubs, mask hanging around her neck. She was looking at a clipboard, not at them, and Vivien's heart seized because she could not read the expression of someone who was not looking at her face. "Morgan family." Vivien stood. Dante tumbled to the ground but caught himself, small and resilient. Emma appeared suddenly beside her mother, and Matteo, he simply stood there, a wall of expensive fabric and controlled power, as if his presence alone could hold them all steady. "I am Vivien Morgan. Your son is out of surgery. The valve replacement was successful. The tissue is healthy. His cardiac function is already showing improvement. He will need monitoring for the next few days, but I expect a full recovery. Vivien, your son is going to live a full life." The words did not make sense. They were English words in English order, but they had stopped meaning things that corresponded to reality. Vivien opened her mouth. No sound came. "He will live," Matteo said quietly, and it was not a question. His hand found the small of her back, and the touch anchored her to something solid. "He will live," the surgeon confirmed, and moved past them down the corridor. Vivien's knees did not buckle. She simply folded, a piece of fabric with nothing inside it anymore, and Carlo, she knew now it was Carlo, not Marco, Matteo's first lieutenant, the one who had driven the black SUV through the November rain, caught her before she fell. She was crying. She had not cried in so long that her body did not remember how to do it, but now it remembered, and the tears came hard, animal sounds torn from someplace deep and primal. "He will live," she repeated. "Micah will live." They let her into recovery within the hour. Micah lay on a hospital bed, pale as the sheets, tubes running into his small arm, his chest wrapped in bandages. But his eyes opened when she approached, and the relief in his 7-year-old gaze undid her all over again. "Mama," he said, testing the word like it was new. It was. She had been just Vivien before, just mom, just the tired woman who worked 2 jobs and could not afford to look sad. Now she was Mama. Now she was someone who had chosen to stay. "I am here, baby. I am here." She took his small hand, careful of the fall line, and sat beside him, not moving, not speaking, just breathing in the same rhythm as her son. The machines around him beeped in steady patterns, a chorus of life and healing. Later that evening, she did not know what time had become irrelevant, Matteo appeared in the doorway with Dante. The boy moved to the hospital bed with surprising gentleness and looked at Micah, who was sleeping, his small face finally relaxed, finally free of the strain it had carried since birth. "Is he going to be okay?" Dante asked. "Yes," Vivien said. "He is going to be okay. You can be his mama now, Dante said, and took Micah's hand carefully, holding it the way he might have held something precious. I am happy. Papa said you saved my life in the card room. Now Micah is saved too. Vivien looked at Matteo, standing in the doorway like something carved from shadow and authority. She left Dante with Micah and stepped into the corridor where the fluorescent lights hummed their endless hum. The news said they were arrested, she said. Douglas and Sophie. Federal prison. 40 years each. Matteo did not deny it. His expression remained the same, but something in his shoulders changed, some weight settling into them like he was glad to finally set it down. They hurt you, he said simply. That is not acceptable. You did not have to do that, Vivien whispered. I am nobody to you. I am nobody at all. Matteo stepped closer. The hallway lights caught the scar on his face, made it look even deeper, even older. My son calls you Mama. You saved his life in that room when nobody else would have risked it. You saved mine on the highway when you trusted a stranger in the rain. You are not nobody. His voice dropped until it was barely audible. You are family. Vivien looked back through the window at Dante holding Micah's hand, at Emma sleeping in the corner chair, at the monitors showing her son's healthy heartbeat. She looked at the man in front of her, the man who had built an empire on vengeance and was now considering something else entirely. I do not know how to be part of your world, she said. You are not part of my world, Matteo replied, and his hand found hers in the corridor's fluorescent silence. You are the center of it. Everything I built on control and vengeance means nothing if the people I care about suffer. You showed me that. His eyes glistened, and Vivien understood that this moment, this vulnerability, was something his men had never seen, something this man had never allowed himself to feel. Let me choose you. Let me choose them. Let me show you what it means to be safe. Vivien nodded, tears streaming freely now, tears of relief and gratitude and something that might have been the beginning of love. From the hospital room, Dante cheered, small and bright. 1 month later, Thanksgiving. The estate that had once held only power and violence now held warmth. A dining table stretched under a crystal chandelier, and around it sat Vivien, Micah, Emma, Matteo, Dante, Carlo, and Pietro. The windows rattled with November wind, but inside, candlelight flickered across wine glasses and plates of food prepared by hands that knew how to care. Matteo sat at the head of the table. Vivien sat beside him, his hand never leaving hers. When he spoke, his voice was different, not softened, but anchored to something real. I learned once that the strongest empires are built on loyalty and fear, he said quietly. I was wrong. The strongest thing I have ever known is a woman who gave her son hope when she had none left for herself, and who trusted a stranger in the rain. He looked at Vivien. Who gave my son a mother? Who became my family? Micah smiled, color already returning to his cheeks, his small heart beating strong and steady beneath his ribs. Emma reached across and squeezed her mother's hand. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, the warmth held them all. What we have witnessed tonight is a story about invisible people becoming seen, about the belief that kindness in small moments echoes back when you need it most desperately. Vivien Morgan entered the world as a widow with $2 in her pocket and a dying son, trapped by people who believed her silence was guaranteed by desperation. She left as the center of a family, not because power rescued her, but because her courage in the moment she mattered most, saving a child in an underground poker room, trusting a stranger in a storm, revealed something true: the strongest foundations are not built on vengeance. They are built on those who choose to stay when others would run. Douglas Hale and Sophie Langford believed they could steal from the powerless without consequence. 40 years in federal prison corrected that belief. And Matteo Castelliano learned that the empire he built at 17 to avenge his father could become something greater, a family formed not by blood but by those who choose to show up when the storm arrives. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that courage in small moments can change everything. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story of justice, redemption, and the families we choose. Comment below, have you ever helped a stranger and had it come back to you when you needed it most? I read every single one. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. After the rain, the sky clears. We will see you in the next story.